So some of the terms we've heard from here are leadership, new ideas, involving communities. But my understanding of entrepreneurship also, thank you, is that it is about innovation, new ideas. Entrepreneurship, thank you so much, Senator. There are not many times when a senator will be able to pick up papers for me. So innovation, new ideas. Now, Senator Boarque, in government, which we know to be a place for bureaucracy and tradition and so forth, how can you be an innovator within a government institution, within, in particular in Brazil, a huge country, huge bureaucracy? How are you able to be an innovator?
I think that the first question is how to put state and private together in favor of public. I think there's a difference between public and state. Sometimes the state does not work for the public. And sometimes private people can work to the public. For example, in Brazil, there is a bank that has almost 40 schools, very good schools, public schools, free school, good school. It's public, although they have a private owner. How to put together? I'll give an example. We had some time ago, not so many children in Brazil in school. Or let's say the other way around. We had 20–30% of children out of school. It was possible to private groups to pay poor family to bring their children to school. The school by the government. We put together. After some time, the government took the idea and innovate. Today in Brazil, we have 12 million families receiving an allowance with the condition that the children, they have to be in school and they cannot miss the classes. This is a kind of cooperation, this is innovation. The cooperation per se is an innovation. And it's an innovation by the government to pay families to put their children in school. There is another closer to that, to put some amount of money in a saving account under the condition that the child will be promoted from 1 year to the other. The child cannot touch the money if he or she finishes high school. This is an innovation.
These are two programs that the senator was talking about. One is called Bolsa Escola, very well known and also evaluated. And the other one is Poupança Escola from Brazil. But the question I have for John Mitchell here is that when in the work that you've been doing in under CARE or as part of CARE, have you actually been able to find government officials who are willing to pick up innovations, new ideas, pilots, and then incorporate them into the actual programs of government?
Yes, I'll give one example. In Egypt, CARE has had a large involvement in the education sector for several years, and we found working, as we were trying to support the education sector in Egypt and working with rural schools, that one of the key constraints was that girls were not being allowed into the schools because they didn't have birth certificates. And so we worked with the communities that were involved in those schools and jointly went to the local authorities and talked about this problem. And it was really, and the local authorities were very much supportive in terms of addressing this problem and enabling girls to get birth certificates so they could continue their education. And just you know, those small sorts of things sometimes, they may seem small, but actually that was a real enabling factor to freeing up the access to education for girls in that part of Egypt.
I've actually visited one of your centers and talked to some of the women who were benefiting from that program. So thank you very much for that. Irene, if I might address you as Irene. So when governments have actually picked up some of the projects that you have in Action Aid, does the character of the program change when the government has become involved in these innovations?
Thank you, Elizabeth. The advantage, maybe just to start off with that, the advantage of working in partnership with governments is that, as illustrated by John, governments are able to build up these programs to a higher scale than civil society or even the private sector may do because of the public resources that they have at their disposal. So yes, there is an advantage in working with governments because you can get the scale, you can get many more children, many more schools reached by these kind of programs. As to the character and the impact that this may have on the programs and whether they become less innovative, I think it very much depends on the process of engagement with governments. Quite often, what we have found in our experience with Action Aid is that governments, particularly at a local government level, are quite interested in learning new ways of becoming more efficient, but lack the capacity, and in some cases also lack the resources. Because in many countries, we find that while we have decentralization of responsibilities, there isn't always sufficient decentralization of resources or financial resources to the lower levels. So this creates constraints for governments at a local level. Now, what civil society can do, and probably private sector actors can do as well, is to build up the capacity of governments and then at the same time build up on the demand side. So working with the local communities, with the parents, with the teachers associations or teachers unions to build up the demand side and ensure that we can hold the governments then to account. Yeah.
John, would you like to answer that question too?
Yeah, I'd just like to add a little bit. I agree with everything that Irene has said. And I think one of the keys also is to ensure that it's not just the government that continues to focus on education. So, for example, continuing to promote the idea of parent and community involvement in schools. So even though governments can take over a program, it's essential that there is that, if you like, counterbalance, that engagement and that ownership of communities in school programs. And, you know, again, another example from CARE's experience, we've been working with community schools in Afghanistan. And, you know, that's a context where there's, as we all know, there's a lot of unrest and violence. And schools that were just sort of built top-down by government or various other actors in that context were often the ones that were most attacked by violent groups, whereas those schools where there was real community engagement in the development of the school, in the management of the school, those schools have continued and been successful. So I think that, you know, counterbalancing government with the involvement of communities in particular is essential.
Told me that you used to have an NGO which had, I guess, the seeds of Multi-Stakeholder, but that as the government picked it up, the NGO has become smaller. Did Multi-Stakeholder start with a different idea than what it has become?
That's a very good question, and thanks to it I can put together teacher, politician, and NGO person. The idea of it to pay per family to have their children in school, it started when I was the rector of the University of Brasilia. And we had a group to think about the future of Brazil. We took the problems we have had and we looked to solutions. One was children out of school. Then I had the idea, why not to pay to them? The same way we pay to someone already engineer to have a PhD in engineering. That was the idea as a teacher. After that, I was the governor of federal district, is a state in Brazil, and I implemented it as a politician. Just after, it's a very small state, just after finishing my mandate, I created an NGO, Child Mission. And I started around the world in Brazil. World Bank financed, UNESCO financed, UNICEF financed my travel around. And the president took the idea and implemented in Brazil for 4 million families. The following president took the same idea and implemented to 12 million. This is a way of cooperation. But I want to make another kind of cooperation, micro-cooperation, from government to private people. One state government in Brazil had a very good idea. The governor said, we have problems in the school. Please adopt one school. He said to businessmen, businesswomen, he said to private person, I personally adopted one school. What do you do? What do you do with that? We go to the school, we look around, what's missing in the school? And we finance that. We finance building, not the whole building, but some special aspect of building. Equipment, like computers. That's a very good cooperation between government and the private sector.